and welcome to Chicanime. My name is Lauren, and today I am looking at an Andy News video about Cocytus or Cocytus or however it's going to be pronounced throughout the video. I feel like some of these videos came to me out of order, and I feel like I've seen them out of order. So if there's one that I missed, go ahead and link it to me, because I don't even know. I can't find things. So anyway, this was Who is Cocytus Part 2, which should have followed Who is Cocytus Part 1, but it didn't. I think I went right into How Strong, and look, things are... I do not know. I think I got a weird playlist or something, and something was in the wrong spot, so not sure how I managed to mess this up this badly, but I did. Fixing it now, and you can go ahead and let me know which one I missed. There's 4 Cocytus videos, and I don't know which ones I haven't seen. So, tell me. And let's watch this one.
Cocytus is one of the few NPC characters in Overlord that have their own subplot.
Okay.
There's subtle elements that were placed throughout the Lizardmen arc of Season 2 that allowed him to develop into something beyond Takemikazuchi or Ainz's expectations.
Good for
so
him.
Let's see how exactly this happened as we take a look at everything else that went into making Cocytus who he is. But first, this video is sponsored by Crunchyroll. With crunchyroll.com/anynews, you can get a free 14-day trial of Crunchyroll Premium today, giving you complete access to not only all the HD ad-free anime and drama titles they host, but also a wide selection of popular manga. That means when you're done catching up on the latest episode of Danmachi Season 2, or pretty much everyone's current favorite anime Demon Slayer, you can then go read the latest chapter of Shield Hero or Attack on Titan.
I've seen like part of one episode, and I've
episodes
seen
are professionally subtitled and
some
can
of
be
the
released as soon
intro
as an hour
songs.
after they air in Japan. So when the new seasons of My Hero Academia and Sword Art Online comes out, then Crunchyroll's the place to see it first. So go ahead and use crunchyroll.com/anynews, link in the description, to get your 14-day free trial of Crunchyroll Premium today. Now, let's get back to the video. You may recall that Cocytus' name refers to the 9th layer of Hell, the frozen lake known as Cocytus, with the lake itself frozen solid, entombing any and all traitors and oathbreakers within its icy grasp. Which is rather strange, considering that loyalty and honor are fairly central to Cocytus' character.
You know, that could be like a reverse, like a subversion of expectations. Moe, right?
Especially the part about being loyal to his lord. So, I think the aspect that his name draws from is more in the sense that Cocytus would be very keen to punish traitors. But then again, most of the Guardians would be. After all, they all share that same undying loyalty to the Supreme Ones. And it's not like warrior Takemikazuchi could have known that when making Cocytus. So it remains a bit of a mystery as to where the NPC's loyalty comes from exactly, even to Ainz. Personally, our theory is that it's largely a function of the fact that as former NPCs, they were flagged as allied characters not only for the purposes of friendly fire, but also so that they would obey any command given to them by the guild members. So when they were turned into these living creatures and gained their sentience, they also carried this aspect forward as this absolute unquestioning loyalty. However, if you look carefully, you can still see the difference between characters like Cocytus, Sebas, and Albedo, who were specifically written by their creators to embody a strong degree of loyalty and duty, in comparison to characters like Aura, Mare, Pandora's actor, or Lupus Regina, who are quite a bit more free-spirited in their interpretation of Ainz's orders and their behavior around him. Out of all of them.
But like, I mean, I feel like that also makes a certain amount of sense, and like with the way that those characters are and their like classes, like a little bit of flexibility is kind of important with those sorts of with the classes that they are. You know, just like a little bit. You got to be able to go with the flow a little bit more for some of that.
Cocytus could very well be described as one of the most loyal NPCs, insofar as he simply tries to do exactly as he's told with no real interpretation. But as we'll see in just a minute, this is the very opposite of what Ainz actually wants. First, let's talk about Cocytus' morality. His karma rating is in the neutral range, but leaning slightly more towards the good side at plus 50. Above 100 or below negative 100 seems to be the point at which a character begins to significantly demonstrate evil or good tendencies, with truly vile personalities like Albedo and Demiurge capping at negative 500. With neutrality, it's a bit of a catch-all for pragmatists who look out for themselves and the people that they care about, encompassing those who are ideologically committed to being impartial or neutral. as well as people with interests or priorities that don't neatly fall into a traditional good or evil dichotomy. Cocytus is an example.
They're fun. They're fun to play
As
neutral
we know,
characters.
He is first and foremost a warrior, and as such, respects others with martial prowess and skill, especially since the Bushido code that he seems to embody so closely emphasizes a certain degree of compassion and kindness, making Cocytus lean a bit more towards that good alignment. Unlike Sibas, he probably won't twist or defy orders to help out the innocent.
He probably wouldn't think about it, huh? He it wouldn't really occur to him to do that. But like with Sebas, it would, because okay. I'm just trying to think of again, I always try to think about these in terms of actually playing D&D, and it's playing more neutral characters it's interesting because I've got a couple neutral more neutral characters that I have, and I got I've got one who's just still chaotic good, but on the more aligned on the good side, and she's kind of harder for me to play, honestly, because her whole thing is she's going out to do something to help somebody else. She left to go and help someone. That's why she's an adventurer, is she's on a mission to do some good for somebody who's more or less an innocent. And she's kind of being nonsensical along the way because the chaos part. But it's easier to play the characters who are what are you gonna give me if I do this thing for you? Because it's a game. It's D&D. It's transactional. You want to get the cool magical items and stuff. So it's easier to play a character who wants to get those things, because I, the character, want to have those things. So it's just it's just interesting to play a character who it wouldn't occur to them to bend over backwards to help someone altruistically. And I feel, playing a character who would. It's that's why you need a paladin sometimes. In your group, you need someone who's willing to be yes, I fight for right and truth. Let's go and help this innocent,
Or even hunt down evil people with a furious vengeance. But he will be as nice, honest, and reasonable as his orders allow him to be. Which leads us to his character arc. Much like some of the other NPCs like Shaltir, Sibas, and even arguably Albedo, Cocytus experiences a subtle conflict between how he was originally created and his loyalty to the Supreme Ones. These character arcs can be quite difficult to pick up on in the anime, mostly due to the light novel's general lack of focus on them in comparison to more traditional dramas. So these arcs tend to get lost in the details when the anime adaptation comes around. What they're meant to be are interesting little subplots that the anime really doesn't have time to delve into, if at all.
I really wish that they had gone a little more into Cocytus, though, because I was really enjoying his whole thing, and people have had to pause and explain to me specifically so much, and I'm but I really wish that they delved, because I got close. I'm scratching the surface from watching the anime, but I really wish that people would have told me about the rest. Also, I am going to be doing a reaction to the movie. I'm still kind of playing with the idea of maybe doing a live reaction to the movie and watching it, making it a premiere, making it a whole event. So I'll probably release a poll about that in the near future.
I mean, they only have 4 or so episodes for 300 pages of each volume of the light novel. On top of that, the NPCs are often designed to have quirky personalities to suit Overlord's brand of dark humor. They don't necessarily need actual character arcs if they're instead just used as comedic devices. On the other hand, NPCs like Sibas and Cocytus, who aren't very comedic at all, are often more in need of these character arcs to keep them interesting. And in the case of Cocytus, everything from his sense of morality and samurai-type personality to even the details of his creator play into it. The defining moment for Cocytus came in Volume 4, the Lizardmen Heroes arc. He had been told by Ainz to lead an army against the Lizardmen, but to not take the field himself. And like a dutiful samurai, he obeyed his lord, even if he wasn't very good at following through with the orders he was given. And as a result, the Lizardmen rallied and were able to come up with a hard-fought victory. It wasn't pretty though. Former enemies banded together under one loose banner, employing desperate gambits and sacrificing many lives as they all fought to the death. But in the end, they did defeat Cocytus' army, leaving him no choice but to return to Ainz ashamed. Part of the reason for his loss was because of the usual NPC hubris. Cocytus simply presumed that whatever forces Ainz gave him would be sufficient to annihilate the Lizardmen, believing that because it was the Supreme One who'd ordered it, the plan was infallible, as well as assuming that the NPCs and forces of Nazarick were inherently superior to the inferior life forms of the New World.
But not always!
It was also in part to Cocytus just not being very bright. Demiurge had concluded that this was a test of Cocytus's competence, coming to the conclusion that Ainz had deliberately assigned him forces that were incapable of simply steamrolling all over the Lizardmen.
Again, I still love it that everyone just gives Ainz so much credit. They're like, oh yeah, you did this on purpose, it was a test. Yes. It was. Always. And Ainz at least is clever enough to always kind of go with that particular flow. You know, it gives Ghostbusters, if someone asks if you're a god, you say yes. Like, he yes ands. Ainz is great at the art of the yes and.
But Cocytus wasn't as bright as Demiurge, and he couldn't conceive the possibility that Ainz may have just given him this task as a test. Now, losing on purpose isn't exactly something an honorable samurai would try and do. I mean, even after Demiurge pointed out that Ainz may have intended for him to lose the battle, Cocytus still felt a strong sense of shame and regret for his failure. Fortunately for both Cocytus and Ainz, the army was mainly comprised of weak skeletons called pop monsters, which regularly respawned in Nazarick on a daily basis. And so, despite losing the entire army, the cost of the operation was effectively nil, not accounting for the Elder Igaba that Ainz had created as an experiment. This person was heavily implied to be one of the captured Sunlight Scripture soldiers from Season 1.
Oh,
in any case,
was he?
Whether all of them died or none of them did, the effect on Ainz or Nazarick would be inconsequential. So, Ainz didn't care too much whether Cocytus won or lost. He knew Cocytus wasn't a military expert. In fact, his motivation with the entire campaign was basically just to see if NPCs could learn. See, back in Yggdrasil, improvements in skill, ability, and knowledge was largely...
I remember that there was like a specific reason he wanted Cocytus to lose. I remembered that, but I couldn't remember exactly what it was. So this was a test to see if how flexible are you? Can you learn and grow? Can you improve on what you've been given without your systems being tweaked? Right. I try to remember that.
Tracked with what you'd expect. Experience points. You gained power through acquiring XP to increase your level and improve specific classes. By contrast, the New World was a bit of a mystery. Experience points were largely an abstraction and simplification from reality. So Ainz wondered how these worlds differed in the New World. How were they the same? It would seem ridiculous that a wizard who spent all their life studying magic would still be level 1 since they've never killed any monsters. More importantly, Ainz wondered whether he or any of the other level 100 NPCs for that matter.
That's the other reason, like that's the other like level 1 certain things in D&D, me trying to come up with characters. I always have to have a really good reason for a person who's in whatever class they're in. Why are they a level 1 if they're not a child? Like if they're like not 16 years old, if they're an adult and they've been doing this presumably for a long time, why are they still a level 1? So like for my rogue character, starting at a level 1 as a person in their mid-20s, I had that person be a level 1 because I put a lot of their stats into wisdom, into persuasion, performance, to insight, so much into insight. I had like a +7 as a level 1 character in insight. So I decided to make my character a more of like they'd been acting as a spy master type rogue. With a very high insight, good at checking and seeing if people are lying, information gathering, which explained why their abilities to do like sleight of hand and stealth checks and stuff, that had kind of fallen by the wayside. They hadn't trained with that for a long time. So that is why that's why they were level 1, because they hadn't really been in the field for a while. They hadn't been doing stuff, but they still had skills. I like maxed out certain skills as high as I could go to make it make sense for that character. Like I had a wizard character. She's an ancient gnome, but she has not really been practicing magic for most of her life. Like she had an incident when she was young that caused her to learn some magic and to use it. in order to get out of a bad situation. But then she was out of the bad situation and didn't really feel the need to return to using magic for a long time until something happened when she was when she was a lot older. And then she's like, well, I guess that was a skill I had at one point. Guess I'll pick that back up. And so she picks it back up and starts using magic in that way again. So that's why she's a level 1. So it's like I need to have reasons for people who have been doing stuff or of like a certain age. It's like, why are they just a level 1? Have they been doing this for a while? Then they can't be like, but like what brought them to that point? That I find it, I like character building just in general. I think it's interesting. But see, what he's bringing up was a good point. Like D&D, I was like, oh, I wish there was like a way to like, maybe you didn't have to necessarily start. Maybe not every campaign has to start at level 1. I mean, it's fun to start at level 1 because then you can build up, but story-wise, it can be really complicated to figure out why an elf fighter or an elf ranger sucks at being an elf ranger because they're 200 years old. You know, it's like, why were they never ranging before? Like, what's happened? Like, and that's why I think that a lot of D&D characters have tragic backstories, because like it's an easy way to sort of give a person a reason to have a half of a skill but be really low level even if they're old. So I try to come up with backstories that aren't really tragic. And like that lies the difficulty.
Matter could even increase their level beyond the level 100 cap that was placed in Yggdrasil. And if he couldn't gain experience, did that mean he wouldn't be able to learn or get better at anything? His adventuring as Momon was part of an experiment to find that out himself. But he also wanted to see if the rules were any different for the NPCs. And so Ainz did what any
long tangent, I'm sorry.
Go find some monsters to kill. That was how it normally worked in Yggdrasil. Fight monsters, gain XP, acquire some loot, have some fun.
Yeah.
Though he didn't expect to actually get any XP or useful loot from the Lizardmen. He merely viewed them as what were effectively toys for his amusement. Not only because his undead race prevents him from having any kind of empathy, but monsters and MMOs are just a means to an end. And naturally, Ainz brought that attitude into the New World. In this case, he saw them as an opportunity to learn about the New World's mechanics, nothing more.
And he considered them monsters of the New World, so they're there to die,
the
right?
Lizardmen are neither mindless monsters, nor are they evil creatures who exist to be farmed for loot or reward.
But I can understand why he saw them that way. That makes sense. Oh, that's different.
They are each their own individual, coming together to form a civilization, a culture. And with that comes their own hopes, dreams, conflicts, and so on. They share far more in common with humans than even Ainz does.
Yeah, I really liked the Lizardman arc.
The Lizardmen heroes alludes to the fundamental nature of it. They are the protagonists of their own heroic struggle against a terrifying overlord. Ask yourself, if the Lizardmen were a far more humanoid-looking race, and we were following things from their perspective, would we not have a radically different outlook on the events?
No, I didn't think so, because I was so excited for them. I really liked the Lizardmen. I felt bad for them the entire time. And that's why I was like, I kind of don't want I feel like I remember not wanting the Lizardmen to lose. I was like, I knew they had to, but like I didn't want them to. I wanted Ainz to do what he did with Karn, or Karne, or however you say it. I wanted him to just like kind of be like, you guys are mine now. Like, and now I'll protect you, and you will fight for me sometimes, but I will protect. I liked them so much from the get-go.
The differing audience reactions to the Tomb Invasion arc versus the Lizardmen arc are certainly interesting in that respect.
Like,
Many more of you started to realize that Ainz might just be the bad guy when he slaughtered all the adventurers.
I didn't care about the adventurers though.
This was the case when he attempted to genocide an entire species for an experiment. Now, though many in the audience did not sympathize very heavily with the Lizardmen, Cocytus certainly did. And so, in defiance of Ainz's direct orders, and despite the fact that he had just shamed himself, Cocytus requested that the Lizardmen be spared. To request something from one of the Supreme Ones is practically already a grave insult. After all, as far as the NPCs are concerned, they exist only to serve the Supreme Ones' will. And yet, Cocytus was willing to defy it, even after failing to accomplish Ainz's orders. Perhaps it was in part because the Lizardmen were so sympathetic. Part of Bushido emphasizes having a righteous and benevolent character. Though, unlike the more traditional Western superhero morality that Touchme instilled into Sebas's character, this doesn't necessarily mean standing up against villains or ignoring orders to protect the innocent. Even if a samurai was loyal to an imperialist, warmongering lord, they would still have to follow their orders. The only caveat is that the warrior ought to behave respectfully and gracefully while doing so, trying the best they can to avoid the unnecessary bloodshed of innocents, as well as assist those victimized by the war, such as orphans. But this wasn't the only reason he didn't want them to die. The primary reason why Cocytus was so invested in the Lizardmen's fate was that he respected them. Remember, Bushido was about the balance between martial prowess and wisdom. Being able to master your skills at fighting is just as important as being honorable and wise. And so, when the Lizardmen rallied to come back against all possible odds, Cocytus, as a fellow warrior, was greatly impressed by their tenacity, spirit, and skill. And perhaps he inherited the part of his creator Takuma Kazuchi that romanticized facing down impossible odds and either overcoming them with skill and luck, or going out in a blaze of glory. I mean, there's no doubt that Takuma Kazuchi would have loved to see the Lizardmen's battle against Nazarick. Hell, he would have been the first to be rooting for their victory. So this is likely another example of a mechanic that an NPC inadvertently inherited from their creator's personality traits. Of course, just because Cocytus had asked him, that doesn't mean that Ainz would agree. You might be forgiven for thinking that conquering and ruling the Lizardmen was all part of Ainz's master plan. After all, even Demiurge seemed convinced that everything had taken place as Ainz had foreseen. But Overlord's signature humor typically entails Ainz and his NPCs misinterpreting each other. And so,
on different
in reality,
pages.
Ainz couldn't have cared less about what happened to them. Like I said before, he saw them as monsters who existed only for his personal enjoyment. And so, when Cocytus
Which is wild that, like, Ainz's, reaction to the Lizardmen and was even more cold and calculating than Demiurge's was. Like, that doesn't happen that often, I don't think, in this show. It's just, so it's interesting that it did happen here.
The request to save them, he was thoroughly shocked, surprised even, and a little concerned that Cocytus seemed to be empathizing with the Lizardmen, but ultimately very excited. Remember, Ainz's primary motivation was to see the NPCs learn and improve, but the first step towards that would require them to have to think for themselves. Normally, their reaction was simply to obey whatever commands or plans Ainz came up with, and rarely did they interject with better ideas. This was concerning to Ainz, since his mind was still that of a human and was not really capable of living up to the lofty expectations they set for him. Cocytus in particular was notorious for this, often telling others and even Ainz that he viewed himself as little more than a sword, that his job was not to think, but to cut down whatever he swung his sword at. However, Ainz had repeatedly told the Guardians to disregard this way of thinking, and try to become more than that. He wanted them to be more independent, become able to think for themselves. So when Cocytus made his request, Ainz was more than eager to hear his reasoning. What was the basis behind it? What benefit could it bring to Nazarick? Perhaps Cocytus saw something more than just beings to act as an experience farm. Of course, Cocytus's motivation was not based on how they could be useful to Nazarick.
Right.
He felt embarrassed and ashamed to admit that it was simply to honor them as warriors. Try as he might, he couldn't come up with a useful purpose for them. With regards to their militaristic capabilities, they would provide effectively no value. I mean, the bulk of Nazarick's armies were comprised of considerably stronger undead troops. So Ainz then suggested massacring them and using their corpses for necromancy experiments, to which Cocytus couldn't justifiably claim that they'd be more useful alive than as undead slaves.
He just doesn't want them to.
Especially since the warriors Ainz could use their bodies to create were individually much more powerful than any Lizardman. If not for the intervention of Demiurge, who could articulate a better case, the Lizardmen might not have made it past mid-second season. Of course, it's not as if Demiurge did so out of the kindness of his heart.
Of course not.
He seemed to think that this was some kind of test from Ainz that the NPCs had to overcome. And so he racked his brain trying to come up with potential uses for them, ultimately settling on the idea of using the Lizardmen as a test case for ruling other species.
It is interesting that, if Ainz wanted them to be able to think for themselves and grow more independent, and, Demiurge is brilliant, but he can still only think about it in terms of what Ainz wants. But in Cocytus is the one who, stepped out and wanted something for himself, not for Nazarick, not for Ainz. This is something he wanted for himself. And Demiurge is this is and had to figure out how to make it work for Ainz because that's what he was thinking. So really, Cocytus is still the one who proved the point. He's still the one who like succeeded this experiment, which I think is kind of interesting.
After all, it would be good practice for Ainz's impending world of domination. Well, that's what Demiurge thought anyway. And so, rather than be tasked with exterminating them, Cocytus was ultimately put in command of them, told to rule them without the use of terror tactics. Ainz would go on to resurrect a small handful of those
my favorites,
including several of the chieftains,
using
the promise of resurrection and future support as a carrot to dangle in front of them. It was through this that Cocytus was basically appointed governor and administrator of Ainz's new Lizardmen province, and he would go on to be a fairly good administrator of the tribe. Most of his time was spent leading them on subjugation missions against other demi-human tribes in the area, such as the Toadmen. While Nazarick's undead armies could no doubt conquer them in mere days, perhaps Cocytus enjoyed the challenge of leading the relatively weak Lizardmen against other demi-human tribes who matched their strength. Maybe Ainz had told him to use this opportunity to continue to practice leading troops in battle. Or perhaps he was searching for a way for the Lizardmen to make useful contributions in the army and soon-to-be nation of Nazarick. Though it was probably a combination of all of these factors. Now, although he was their new leader, Cocytus's policy was to interact with the Lizardmen in a friendly, respectful manner, presumably in order to avoid fostering resentment. Fortunately, the Lizardmen race had a culture of tribal conflict, wherein tribes would conquer and be conquered by other tribes on a regular basis, mostly as a result of resource or territorial battles. So, the Lizardmen were able to adapt fairly quickly to this new arrangement, and Cocytus effectively assumed the role of tribal chieftain. Of course, treating a conquered civilian populace with respect and dignity is also something that you'd expect from a samurai practicing Bushido. So you might say it was simply in Cocytus's nature to maintain such a camaraderie with his subordinates. Aside from leading them into war, Cocytus was also in charge of the day-to-day operations and decisions. The first major order of business was to relocate the various tribes into one large village. As a new colony of Nazarick, the Lizardmen were provided with appropriate support, including golems to help build infrastructure like walls and watchtowers, a small detachment of elite Nazarick Old Guarders and Nazarick skeleton troops to defend their settlement, as well as temporary food support. If you'll recall, the dwindling fish population was a minor plot point early on during the Lizardmen arc, and Ainz freezing the entire lake solid probably didn't help much in that regard.
No, probably not.
Fortunately, the guild owned a minor magical artifact called Dogda's Cauldron, which could produce any kind of food one requested in exchange for a small amount of Yggdrasil gold. So this is what was used to help provide for them in the short term. As for the end goal, the Lizardmen were supposed to become self-sufficient, and with Dogda's Cauldron, they were able to quickly begin construction of various fish farms under Cocytus's direction. This support wasn't just a benevolent charity though. The Lizardmen were expected to worship Ainz as their new god, and a life-sized statue of him was placed at the center of the village, to be administered and tended to by
I really wish that we'd seen more of this. I really wish we had.
Their highest-ranking druids. Offerings such as fish and flowers were placed at the foot of the statue, worthless to both Ainz and Nazarick of course, but the size and rarity of the offerings were a symbol of the Lizardmen's commitment and dedication. Each of the Lizardmen wore necklaces with an emblem depicting the insignia of Ainz Ul Gon.
It's such a cool
This
symbol,
effectively
too.
marked them as property of Nazarick, as well as was a promise of protection. Any minion of Nazarick would know that those wearing it were under its dominion and should not be harmed. Furthermore, others who damaged Nazarick's property would be committing an offense of the highest order against the Supreme Ones. As such, they would be met with the appropriate retribution. Ultimately, the message was clear. Oppose Nazarick and be destroyed by its overwhelming power. Worship and love Ainz and be the beneficiary of his mercy and kindness. And it was Cocytus who was by and large the one to come up with and implement the majority of these ideas. To one whose only concern before now was how best to be the ideal sword for Ainz, having to effectively become a governor of a province was a big change for him. Many of the common tropes Cocytus was based off of ended up being subverted. Like, rather than join under an opponent after his loss, it was Cocytus who took the Lizardmen under his wing as subordinates. Rather than simply being a loyal underling whose only thought was how best to follow orders and cut down his foes, he had to become a great leader, learn skills of the diplomat, and solve domestic problems. Overall, perhaps he finds his new job far more enjoyable than simply killing what he was told to.
He might.
But yeah, that's how Cocytus became this independent subject of Ainz whose work is now central to Nazarick's operations in the surrounding area. As I mentioned in the beginning, he's one of the few NPCs that gets a noticeable subplot resulting in a more well-developed character. But that's only who he is. Next time we're going to talk about how strong he is. So be sure to keep an eye out for that video along with some other Danmachi and New Fate content. Now, before I go, I'd like to thank Crunchyroll once again for sponsoring this video. Don't forget, you can use crunchyroll.com/anynews or the
I don't know how I missed this one. Like, I do not know why I watched these out of order.
Premium today. And feel free to let me know in the comments what anime you plan on watching once you're there. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao.
Ciao. Yeah, no, I do not know how I got these so mixed up and out of order. I have no idea what happened there, but I finally watched this episode. Yay! And again, like I said, I will be watching the movie soon. I'm going to be putting out a poll to see if people would watch with me. So, or if they would prefer it if I do it in the same way that I watch all the other things, which will involve like more pausing, more, like I feel like if I watch the movie live, it probably will be more like how I've seen a lot of other reactors do reactions, which is just watching the whole thing and just sort of talking over it occasionally. And I don't usually like to do that, but anyway, I'll put up a poll. We'll see how it works, and we'll see if people are interested. But until then, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.